The GKD Bubble is one of those retro handhelds that tries to be extra retro, designed to look like a modern, more pocketable version of the classic Game Gear. The GKD Bubble competes with the likes of the Ammonix XX consoles, boasting emulation capabilities up to and including PS1, N64, PSP and Dreamcast. But does the GKD Bubble live up to the legend of the cult classic Game Gear, or does the bubble pop before it even fully inflates? I've been using the GKD Bubble exclusively as my #1 console for the past week to answer these questions, and this is what happened. GKD is not a handheld company I'm that familiar with. They've come out with a few handhelds that have caught my eye, especially the GKD Pixel, but I've never actually owned one. The GKD Bubble is the first for me. Like the rest of the GKD handhelds, the GKD Bubble is an interesting looking concept, a device designed to look like the Game Gear, arguably the more ergonomic of the old school handhelds, and a device that I'm surprised has not been copied in shape before. We've seen Game Boy clones and even handhelds to look like the SNES and Mega Drive controllers, but I believe this is the first to look like a Game Gear. I must admit though, upon opening the GKD Bubble box, I was a bit underwhelmed. The overall shape and style of the GKD Bubble is spot on, and does a great job of looking like a mini Game Gear. However, the plastic used makes it look a bit like one of those cheap £10 retro handhelds you can pick up in the novelty section and gift aisles in stores. The kind that plays only cheap 8-bit knockoff versions of classic and modern games. But this first impression of the GKD Bubble does a disservice to the brilliant handheld that it actually is. Something we'll understand more as the week evolves. On day one, when I first went to start up the GKD Bubble, it wouldn't work. I realised that it didn't have the SD card with it that holds the operating system. I'm so used to these handhelds coming with their SD cards either already in the device or in the package that I took it for granted. At first, I thought that Go Game Geek had forgotten to provide me with the SD card, but then I remembered that they had sent me an email with some extra info about it. It turned out the email contained a link with instructions to the software I'd need to install onto an SD card to get the system up and running. The instructions were super easy to follow, if you know Chinese. But in all fairness, once I downloaded the right files, it was quite easy to figure out and copy the OS image to the SD card. When it came to putting in the SD card and installing the software, once again a knowledge of Chinese would have been handy, which I didn't have, so I just clicked and hoped for the best. And after what seemed like a pretty confusing setup process, a frozen screen and a restart, the GKD Bubble came to life with the lovely child operating system. Now, first of all, why would you call an OS that? I mean, anyway, I think Lovely Child is well known within the community somewhat, but I'm not familiar with it. It's one of those operating systems that you would have expected from a handheld about 5 years ago. Now, as the SD card contained a brand new install of the OS, that means it had no games on it. I thought that popping out the SD card, putting it into my laptop and copying some games into the ROM folder would work, but I was wrong. The SD card is not organised in that way. Long story short, I rebooted the system into Emulation Station, something you can do by holding down the A button on startup, and then found the USB gadget function in the settings to enable the GKD Bubble to connect directly to my laptop and copy games over using the USB link. I also tried using the FTP, but I couldn't get that to work with the standard login credentials. And that was the end of day one. Now, for those of us who are more used to retro handhelds, these steps aren't really that complex. And I personally enjoy this aspect of setting up a device, but for a newcomer it can be a bit overwhelming. Maybe I'm just too used to handhelds coming already set up, and maybe other orders of the GKD Bubble will come with software already installed. But it was a level of effort I've not had to put in for a while, and it took up most of the little free time I had on the first day. Also, I do want to put in that it's good to notice that once I did change the default OS from Lovely Child to Emulation Station, this choice was remembered every time I powered on the device. I was a bit worried I'd have to hold A every time I loaded up the system, but thankfully that wasn't the case. I stuck with Emulation Station for the rest of the week and had absolutely no issues with the usability or the OS. Now, the week before I had been enjoying playing 007 The World Is Not Enough on the RG Cube XX, and I was close to completing it, so I decided to try and continue on the GKD Bubble. As it's a different device, obviously my progress wasn't saved, so I decided to see if there are any level cheats I could do to get me back to where I was. So I thought this is one of the few PS1 games that doesn't have many cheats for it at all, which is surprising considering when you think that its predecessor, Tomorrow Never Dies, did. So I had to take a different and arguably better approach. I decided to try copying my save files from the RG Cube XX to the GKD Bubble. I started by trying to copy over save states, but these weren't compatible. So instead I copied the memory card files, and this worked a treat. I was really pleased to see this work because As I swap from console to console pretty much on a weekly basis, it's really hard for me to keep progress on any specific game. I've been meaning to see if there's an easy way to transfer the progress between devices, but to this date I just never got around to it. And this is the silver lining to all the setup of the GKD Bubble. Instead of just switching on the device and jumping into a game, it forced me to get my hands dirty, inevitably understanding the system more and thus having more control over it. This solution of copying over memory card files is not unique to the GKD Bubble and is something I will be doing with my future handhelds, but the GKD Bubble kind of forced me to look into it finally. The next step will be to see if I can set up a network or cloud solution to save my games to, which I would be able to access from any compatible device. And this was the end of day 2. Now on to day 3, and it was finally time to get round to some actual gaming. I spent the next couple of days focusing on The World Is Not Enough, with a little bit of Worms Armageddon sprinkled in there, and the GKD Bubble was absolutely brilliant. Despite the look and feel of the cheaper plastic, the GKD Bubble is actually a massively durable and pocket-friendly portable handheld. For its size, I'd say it's probably the most pocket-friendly I've come across. This enabled me to take the GKD Bubble with me pretty much everywhere and crack out some gaming in those short 5-minute bursts. The battery and sleep mode further made this easy, and the 4x3 screen does a great job of creating an immersive and genuine PS1 experience. Most of my days on any given week involve me dropping off and picking up my kids from school and nursery, working from home, relaxing with the family in the evening and getting the kids to sleep. Weekends are a mix of taking the kids to different events and seeing family. A pretty standard family life. So for me, a perfect handheld console is one that I can have with me at my desk, throw in my pocket and sit and relax on the couch with, whilst being able to comfortably and sometimes discreetly jump into a gaming session at any moment. And the GKD Bubble fit perfectly into this lifestyle. Throughout the week I was finishing off 007 The World Is Not Enough by mostly playing in my work breaks, at the school pickups and relaxing in bed. The GKD Bubble always delivered by having a great battery, fully functional sleep mode, spot on emulation and really comfortable controls. To be honest, I was surprised just how well the GKD Bubble did the job. I won't lie, at the start of the week I thought I'd be looking forward to the end of it, but I've become quite attached to my GKD Bubble, which is a big surprise considering the quality of handhelds I have been using over the past few weeks. Having completed 007 The World Is Not Enough and enjoying every second of it, I decided to turn my attention to some PSP and Dreamcast emulation. Something I've put off until now, as the initial impressions left me quite doubtful as to how the GKD Bubble would perform with these devices. But how wrong I could be. The GKD Bubble handles PSP and Dreamcast emulation not just well, but brilliantly. I'd go so far as to say that it's even smoother than its Anbernic XX counterparts. Usually when it comes to the end of these week-long challenges, I try to cram in some other games just for testing purposes. But with the GKD Bubble, I managed to squeeze out a good few sessions of GTA Chinatown Wars, Split Second and Jet Set Radio over the weekend because the GKD Bubble was just so convenient and capable to have around. The GKD Bubble turned out to be a huge surprise to me. Initially, I thought it was going to be a cheaply cranked out device trying to make a quick buck off the current retro handheld craze we seem to be in. But once I got past the cheap feeling but undoubtedly durable plastic shell and cumbersome setup, I found an insanely capable console that ticks all of the boxes for what I would want from a portable retro handheld that can handle up to PSP and Dreamcast emulation for around about £50. At first I didn't think the GKD Bubble would hold a candle to Anbernic's XX lineup, but after spending a week with it, I think the GKD Bubble challenges and even exceeds the XX consoles in some areas. Sure, the XX consoles win in aesthetic quality and user interface, but the GKD Bubble does not mess about, and it handles its emulation with a smoothness and ease I don't often see at this price point. I've thoroughly enjoyed my week with the GKD Bubble and will find it difficult to move on even though a trim UI brick and a Retroid Pocket 5 are waiting at my doorstep. The GKD Bubble is a fantastic option for those willing to look beyond Anbernic and Powkiddy. Links are in the description below. But if you do want to stick with the more well-known Anbernic XX lineup, then check out this video right here.